Looks like we're ready to rock and roll. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have you join us for Mastering Video Interviews. I am Dr. Airies Davis, and I am one of the executives in residence. So I see we have a lot of familiar faces here. So I'm excited to share a few tidbits about how to land those ideal job interviews. Just a quick reminder, this is one part of a series of interviewing best practices, tips, career development tools. We had a few that started earlier this week and partially last week about anxiety and financial resources around career development. And we will have a few more that are forthcoming in the next couple of days. So I would encourage you to go ahead and register, and then also bring your family and friends. Like this is really about support for you as students, as Dominican University students, but it is equally important for any of the support systems that surround you. So just note that we're here for you. So with that being said, just to check in, last week, Elise did an exercise on anxiety, one of your other executives in residence. And I really was reflecting on just where I felt and where I was in this journey of COVID-19. And I want to just check in with you. So this will help me to level set some of the technology that we'll use throughout the session, which will be the chat box. So over to the right side of your screen, possibly at the bottom, depending on how things are set up, there's a chat box. So I want everyone to go ahead and type in, how are you feeling today? Just a simple 1 through 5, 5 being the highest. How are you feeling? And the picture at the bottom, by the way, is one of my Walgreens runs about 2-3 weeks ago, which was, I was sharing with Anna, that was the last time I was outside. So during that Walgreens run, I ran out of Oreo cookies. So the picture on the right is a reflection of how I felt after that last sleeve. So we have, it looks like kind of some 4s, some 3s, a little bit in between. All right, so here's another question. I want you to now think about what brings you joy. What gives you a high level of gratitude or joy? For me, it is sometimes my twin nephews. A lot of times it's reading a book, maybe a book that has a lot of information about how to reshape my way of thinking. So more cognitive books, things like that. Go ahead and type in the chat box. What brings you gratitude? Let's see, what do we have? Relaxation. Oh my gosh, Jeff, that's critical. Let's see, what else do we have? Netflix. Okay, please don't spoil Ozark. Everybody's talking about it, and I'm on, I believe, season 2. So please, 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 no sharing. Okay, we'll get maybe one more. Dogs, learning, family, etc. So we're all on the same page in terms of what brings us joy and gratitude. So I want you to just, as we go through this session, just take a moment to think about those things and people and places and activities that bring you joy, because it is challenging for all of us. And our goal today is to really kind of give you some of those tools that you will still need to use as you go through your interview process, but to also ground you in the fact that we're all in this together and we're all here to support you. Okay? So final questions before we dive in. How many of you have ever conducted a video interview? And that's a yes or no in the chat box. Yes or no. And I'll throw a curveball in there, and this is especially for Amanda. How many of you have a forthcoming interview via Zoom or any of the other online platforms? Okay, looks like a lot of you have, some have not. Possibly, well, what is an online interview? I don't know, Aries, maybe, I don't know. Awesome. Okay, so we will cover what that means and what that looks like. This is our new norm. And one area of notation is that this is a world that I've come from. I spent a large majority of my career online in terms of the work that I did. So I have a very strong comfort level with interviewing online, and also some of the ways that the job seeker and also the interviewer looks for you in terms of your talent. So we'll talk through what that means. And then final question, any burning questions you may have. I want you to think about that. Feel free to type that into the chat box. You see Jamie at the top. Jamie is our executive director of the Career Development Center. And so she will be charged with helping me funnel and take a peek at some of those questions. So go ahead and type those in the chat box or just hold them tight as we go through the session.
All righty. So let's get going. I believe in making sure that you have key takeaways. So we will have four T's that we will have as we discuss these video best practices and tips. One of which is threads. What are you wearing? Technology, time. How much time are you using to research the organization? How much time are you spending to actually prepare? And then finally, talent. You are the talent. You are what you're bringing to the table. So threads, technology, time, and talent are the four T's that we'll discuss during this session. So let's dive right into our first one, your threads. Now, this is something, I cannot set this up. Like, this was probably the most perfect situation, but not so perfect for the person that it happened to. But yesterday, I don't know if any of you guys saw Good Morning America. One of the news professionals, and I'm just going to drop these in because I'll share it probably on the next slide, but he showed up with his suit in tow, and then from like this point down, he did not realize that the camera was showing his bottom part, and he had on his boxer shorts. So you literally saw like look at your eyes, everybody's eyes is like, ah. You literally saw like the skin of his leg in the frame, and it's like no one said anything. So we'll cover some of the threads that are most important for you to wear. Clearly, you know, we're all very, very comfortable right now, but there's a such thing as not knowing how comfortable you should or should not be, because in a lot of cases, you may just have to stand up, get a tissue, anything, and you never know how you will appear on camera. So just be prepared. So first impressions, within the first couple of seconds of actually jumping on an online session,
the interviewer has made some type of, in some cases, unbiased decision or unconscious bias against what you are appearing or how you're presenting yourself. So that's why when you first jump on the session, make sure that whatever you're presenting is polished. So here's the question that I get a lot, and this is for our marketing folks on the line like Anna, and even for some of our accounting and finance individuals like Cameron. You have two spectrums. You have the spectrum of, I am interested in more of a creative environment, and I want to be in a place where they embrace the fact that I may want to come to work a little bit more free-spirited and casual. Many of those interviews are what most will call business casual. So you may see them showing up with a nice cardigan or a shirt maybe without the tie, sweater, something very business casual. Still err on the side of the business because you guys are all business students. So it's important that you have that component in there. And then on the flip side, the more professional services, accounting type firms, they are going to, in some instances, lean more towards a professional attire. So the suit, the tie, the blue colors, the, you know, more stoic and business oriented. So just be mindful of that as you go through the interview process. A question that I get regarding, well, how do I know? I don't know what it is and how I should show up. A really good rule of thumb is to actually go onto the company's website and assess their culture. What I've learned is just by simply looking at some of the pictures of the individuals that are working within the organizations, I can discern the type of employee culture that they have in place. Sometimes, again, it may reflect an environment that is more towards one area than the other in terms of business or business casual. Ask the recruiter or the person that you're interviewing with. They're the go-to, and they can actually give you a lot more information about what to expect in terms of culture and clothing. The other point to note is colors. And this is something I actually learned just most recently with all of the Zoom interviews. The most important colors that show up the best are solid colors, the dark reds, the dark yellows, the blues, the purples, etc. Stay away from anything that is white, busy colors, green. I had someone to tell me this recently. They had on like a green sports jacket, and they said it made them look like they were like one of those golf tournament individuals. So just be mindful of the colors. Another point about the colors and just showing up with your threads, there's these virtual reality background. Just type in the chat box, yes or no. Have you heard of the virtual reality chat boxes, where if you look and someone's out of space and all of these other kind of kooky things? Cool. So it sounds like a lot of you have heard of them. I may not put you on the spot, but how many of you actually like those virtual reality spacey, whatever it is that shows your personality backgrounds? Let's see, we have some yes, 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 no, no, no. With Zoom and some of the other technology, if you have a background that you don't necessarily want others to see, you can create a virtual background. And in some instances, to me, I err on the side of, it depends. You'll hear that a lot. It just depends. Sometimes to me, it's distracting. And especially in an interview, you don't want anything to take away from the threads and the appearance that you're putting in place. So I would err on the side of no, but I'll be curious with Elise and Jamie to get your thought as we go through this. Feel free to unmute Elise and Jamie at any point. And then try on the outfit. And we are all very comfortable with selfies, right? So take some time to actually take a picture of yourself in that outfit. Think about it just as you would an actual interview. It's the same concept. Video yourself conducting the interview, because that also gives you a comfort level. When we're sitting in front of, right now, if I can give you guys the background that I'm in, or the foreground in this case, you probably would judge me for the rest of my life. I'm in a room that has literally probably every piece of clothing that I have, but you can't tell because of where I'm seated in this room. So just be mindful of where you're positioned and how you are presenting yourself in terms of the background. And some of this we'll touch on in terms of technology. Going back to the business on top and the party on the bottom, that has happened. And again, just be mindful. Try to be a minimalist in terms of jewelry, makeup, no graphic t-shirts, no hats, anything that's going to take away from you presenting your best self. So we're going to go to the next one. We talked about your threads, what you're bringing to the table, what you're wearing. So let's do a little bit about technology. Technology is simply put the software, anything that you're putting in place to start the actual interview. So we've heard of Zoom, we've heard of all of the different types of platforms that are very, very familiar right now. But here's the challenge. Just by raise of hands or yes or no, can you see the little ring that may be in my glasses a little bit? You may see a little ring, a little circle. So yes, no. What I did in preparation for this session is I set up almost like a technology system. So make sure that you have any type of lighting. You're framing yourself from this point up, from head, almost as if your shoulders and the top part of your head are all positioned into the screen. Make sure that your eye level. Now, here's something that I'm doing a little bit off kiltered, but I'll do two things so that you can test this out and you can see what I mean. So right now I'm looking at Elise and I'm looking at Bianca, and it looks kind of weird, right? It looks like I'm looking off to the side. Now I'm looking at everybody on the screen. So be very intentional about looking at that dot in the middle or your camera, because that helps the interviewer note that you're having a conversation, because it's already weird to talk to someone on screen. And now you have to, oh, I see all these little faces at the bottom. So who do I look at? Where do I go? Stay in tune to the little box in front of you versus the boxes that are on the right side. Have a backup plan. I have two backup plans. So keep your cell phone somewhere off to the side. Make sure it's off. Make sure all of your technology is off. But even if you have to have it set up so that you can log quickly into your cell phone or your iPad or any of your other tablets, just in case your computer technology is not functioning. So always have a backup plan just in case. And then arrive at least, I would say, about 10 to 15 minutes earlier than the actual start of your session. That's going to give you a chance to double check your settings, silence everything, and just have a backup. So test, and test one more time. So I'm going to put a few of the students that I've worked with in the past on the spot when I talk about this section. So we have three types of interviews that some may be familiar with and some may not. The first one is called a two-way interview, and that's simply me and you, me and someone else who may be the interviewer, the person that's conducting the questions. The second type of interview is called a one-way interview. So now I'll put some folks on the spot just by the chat box. How many of you have heard of a one-way interview? Yes or no? We have a few more. No. Yeses. I like the comments. Jamie, we have to capture these comments. They're hilarious. No, no, yes, no, maybe so. Okay. So this is one of the most uncomfortable interviews for me. For some, it may be okay, but for me, it is very, very challenging because I like to have that interaction with people. And even if it's on a little screen to the right, I like to know that I can actually see that person. So a solo interview is something where a company sends you in advance, in most cases, a scripted amount of questions that they want you to actually answer via video and then submit. So that's pretty unique and that's very different, but it is, again, the new norm. And what they're trying to do is really assess where you are in terms of your background and your talents. But here's what's really key about those types of interviews. They are oftentimes a replacement to the phone screen. So the same way, again, that you would prepare for an actual phone screen is the way that you would prepare for an one-way or solo interview. So a lot of times they'll send you the questions in advance and then you answer the questions. But here's another hiccup. What if they don't send you those questions in advance? My computer's going a little wackadoodle. Question to the folks that are on the line. If I don't have the questions in advance of a one-way interview, how do I gather those questions so that I can prepare for the interview? Solo, one way. Who do you ask? Go ahead and type in the chat box. Who do you ask? Just think about who you're talking to or the company. Let's see, what do we have? The recruiter. Yes, that, woo woo. The recruiter is the person that you're talking to. They're the ones that are going to be able to answer a lot of these questions about, well, what should I expect? What types of questions? What's a solo interview? How should I prepare for a solo interview? So that's essentially the solo interview. I'm kind of beating that one in because you'll probably have that one come up a little bit more than you know. The final one is called a multiple way or multi-interview, and that's you and a group of individuals. How about that? So it's already challenging that you're walking into a room, virtually in this case, and you are subject to talking to one person. Now you are also subject to maybe talking to yourself. That's the solo one. And now you have to go into a room where you're talking to multiple people at one time. So the question that I am posing to the folks on the line, Michael, you had one. Tell us about your experience. Can you unmute? Give us maybe 2 to 3 words that describe your experience, Michael.
Well, the first word I would use to describe that was, it was just super awkward, very competitive. And it was just, you could tell right off the bat. I want to say I was probably the oldest in that group. It was for an interview with Northwestern Mutual. And if I went first to answer a question, you could clearly tell that they were trying to answer their questions similarly to how I answered it. And I feel like that was just a common thing. Like anytime anybody answered, everyone else was quickly trying to scramble to like make their answer seem like that or try to one up it. So I feel like some of the answers weren't necessarily genuine.
So were you in the interview with other interviewees, or was it just you and the people who were from the company asking you questions?
I was with other interviewees. I thought that was really weird and different.
And this was virtually, right?
Yes.
So you just added another nugget to this whole equation. So I thank you, Michael. Thank you for sharing. There's one side of the equation where you're actually being interviewed by multiple people from the company. So you're the only person that is there for the job. And you have more than 2 people in the room possibly that are constantly throwing questions at you. It is the same process in terms of how you prepare for a one-on-one interview in a situation where you're actually in person with them. You are to take those questions and be prepared to share out your experiences and your stories in the same format. The point that Michael raised, and this is a really, really good point about the interview process, you are going to be in situations where there may be multiple people vying for the same job. And so they may put you in a room with others who are just as eager to land that position. So a lot of times the challenge is, how do you make yourself stand out? I say the same way that you make yourself stand out in any other type of interviewing settings, you do the same. Prepare the question and also your responses. Prepare questions that you want to pose to the interviewees or interviewers, and also prepare questions that are pretty standard. Like, tell me about a time. Like you know that when they start off with the question, tell me about a time, that's a story based. And I'll pick on Cameron at some point with that one. But that's the time that you are to start pulling out those scenarios, any experiences that you've had. So those are the now 4 types of interviews. We have the 2-way, the 1-way, the multi-way, which is you with other interviewees, and then you with the actual interviewer. If you have any questions about that, go ahead and type that into the chat box, because I know that one's a little challenging at times. Amanda, or any of the folks that have forthcoming interviews, or anyone with forthcoming interviews, if you have questions, go ahead and type those into the chat box. So I want to make sure we answer those questions. So we talked about our threads, what we wear. We talked about our technology. How do we set up the technology? Now let's talk about the time. And we alluded to some of this in our discussion, but this is the one that I think is probably the most important. This is our arrival time. What should we ask the recruiter in advance? Here's another tip. Ask the recruiter, Anna told us that. The recruiter is our go-to person. Ask the recruiter, what's our agenda? What's the timeline? Who are the attendees? Now, here's a trick question, and everybody on this call that worked with an executive in residence in particular should be able to answer this question. So I have a bunch of names from the attendee list. What do I do in order to research the backgrounds of those individuals? What steps should I take? Oh, you guys are flooding in. Yay. LinkedIn. Yay. That's exactly what you should do. LinkedIn, and even the company's website, because the company's website will also have information on the people that you're meeting. So take some time to research the individuals. Here's the other question for those that are on the line. So I've researched the individual on LinkedIn. Why? Why is it important for me in advance of the actual session to know who's on the line? You can feel free to respond to that or not, but think about why it's important. I'll say the reason it's important is because, as Michael mentioned earlier, he was in a room with a bunch of other candidates. It makes you stand out. How strong of a candidate will you be if you walked in and you can say, oh, I interviewer Bob, I had an opportunity to review your background on LinkedIn, and I noticed that you have been with X company for 5 years, and your experience in marketing is exactly the direction or the career path or the career trajectory that I'm interested in. Automatically, you're standing out just for the simple reason that you have expressed a similarity or a common thread between the person that you're interviewing. So that's always important. So let's see, we have mutual connections. Absolutely, Michael. Bianca, it shows that you're prepared 150%. Similar to being prepared is research the company, study. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but not only are you studying the culture, but you're studying the products and the solutions and the social media. It is so critical to do these things, guys, because it shows, again, that preparedness, but on top of that, it aligns to if it is the type of environment or culture that you have interest in. Here's a challenge, and I say this a lot, and I know Jamie has heard me say this probably about 5 trillion times, but an interview is an information exchange. It's just as much a chance for you to get to know the company as it is for the company to get to know you. So equally important, you want to be able to say, well, this is the type of environment that's important for me to be a part of. You won't be able to do that unless you research the product, the solutions, and the culture. It also helps you by being able to create questions during the interview, because you do want to be able to have those questions in advance. Take notes. I always have a notebook somewhere, somewhere in the general vicinity. So take notes and ask questions. And then we talked about conducting a practice interview. Make sure that your responses are very succinct and to the point. So here's another quiz or polling question. What is the STAR method? So first person that can answer the STAR method in the chat box gets a yay for me and a thumbs up from Jamie. STAR method. Anyone want to volunteer what is a STAR method online and actually answer? Anna, go for it.
Michael and I were actually talking about this last night. So it was situation, task, action, and result. And we talk about like how people always forget the result.
So why is it important for us to go through the STAR method? What happens with the STAR method? What are we explaining in the STAR method?
It's pretty much walking the other person through the process of your decision making to some extent and your ability to solve whatever problem they're presenting you with.
Absolutely. Spot on. Thank you, Anna. That is so important because it actually makes you stand out. We're talking about all of these tips and tools and techniques to make you stand out during the interview process. But the reality is a lot of students and a lot of individuals that are going in for interviews, they're not preparing using the STAR method. They don't know how to go in and say, because they don't have Granite School of Business, career development programs, but they don't have those types of resources in place. So because of that, they are not automatically triggered to say, okay, this is the situation that I was in, and this is what happened. Okay, this was the task. This is the job or the responsibility that I had. And as a result of that task, these were the actions that I took. A lot of times very quantitative. I saved the company X percentage. I worked with 500 nurses to help solve whatever the solution of the problem was. And as a result, I was able to ... You being that succinct and concrete about your experiences and exposure is 100% going to stand out and save you a lot of time when it comes to preparing for the interview. So always remember the STAR method: situation, task, action, and result. Okay, finally, set up the tone of your interviewer environment. It's cute and it's funny right now for us to have our kids and our dogs and maybe even our roommates and anything in the background to sometimes open the door or distract what we're doing. But for an interview, yes or no, should we have any of those distractions in the background? There should be an overwhelming amount of no's. No. We should not. So be very mindful of your background. Here's a tip and a tool. With your background, think of it as if you were walking into an office, what would you want that person to know about who you are and what you represent? So right now I have a blank background on purpose, but if I were in my traditional office, I may have some books on the wall. I may have like some certifications or things like that that show that I have worked in certain fields of study. I may have my art because I consider myself an artist. So anything that is reflective of your personality is fine, but be mindful of those things that may not reflect your personality. I had one interview recently where the person had some inappropriate photos on the back, and it wasn't necessarily something that they were intending to do, obviously, but you never know. So be mindful of your background and what's happening with the noise in the background. It's also not good to be in your childhood bedroom because no one wants to see the car bed that you grew up in. So you are now maturing as young adults entering into the workforce or continuing in the workforce. So just be mindful of your background. And we had a mixed opinion about the virtual background. Elisa and Jamie, do you have any thoughts about the virtual background?
I'm not a huge fan of the virtual background. I would much rather prefer, I think out of everybody's background I've seen, my favorite so far has been Ramiro Atrastain's with all his books in the background.
Yeah, I love that one.
That's been pretty cool. So I personally would prefer to see something like there's been a couple of people who have some really great stuff going on with art in the background. I think that's nice to see, but I think books are always good to see in the background, which might take, in some cases, some staging, which I think is okay. So depending on where you're at or what you're doing, I think back to what you said earlier, Airies, if you saw the front of my little office setup, it wouldn't look so pretty, but the point is that you can move yourself around to make sure that the background is appropriate. And I think if you're going into an interview, I think it's important to showcase, I think, some of your personality, which you pointed out, or maybe having some books that have to do with whatever job you're trying to get. I don't think that that's a bad idea, right? So just thinking about the role that you're trying to get and what pieces might showcase your interest in the company and that kind of thing. I know I will pay attention if I'm interviewing somebody. Just actually got done doing office manager interviews in Brennan. And And I was looking around the background to see what do they have up and what do they have open and what do they have visible. So it's something that I pay attention to.
Thank you.
What she said. Yeah, I agree with her. And if you look over my left shoulder, you'll see this big black blob. And what that is my husband's bookcase, and it's a mess. So I threw a black blanket over it. Eventually, I'm going to have to solve that problem. But your point is well taken. I mean, I noticed when I've Zoomed with the kids what they've got and where they are. And I think what you said is right. The only thing I would add is that you have to make sure you're not pandering too much to what, like, I would have a book about the company behind me. I try to be a little more subtle so that I didn't look like I was pandering. But that's it. But I agree with what Jamie said.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Well, while I've got everybody interrupted, so Anna had a question in the chat. She said, "How do you deal with noise, kids and dogs specifically?" So that was a question we had from Anna.
So here's a tip with noise, Anna. You have to, quite frankly, put yourself in a situation where those barriers will not be present. So I've had, and this is weird, but I'll be very transparent in saying this. I literally one time went inside of a closet, set it up with the lights and close the door. And that was my place of conversation for the interview. You also have to prepare the people around you that you are going to be conducting an interview. If you have a neighbor, maybe they could take the dog for a couple of minutes, anything you can do to set yourself up for success. So I've done that as a way to make sure that the environment was quiet. I mentioned my twin nephews, they're older now, they're like 13. As you saw when we first started the session, they're still texting me, and sometimes they'll just kind of come into the room that I'm in. So before I even start any sessions, I give everyone the 5-second speech. Listen, I work remotely, and within the next hour or so, I need 150% silence. And this is what silence means. It means that your phones are off, or you're in a situation where I cannot hear the phone. So you're kind of preparing the people around you so that they know, and you're pulling in resources to help support you so that they can take away those distractions. Does that answer your question, Anna?
It does. Yes. I think I have tried to have the conversation with people around you, and right now there's no one around me, but like my sister has a tiny baby, and right now she is having meetings and all that, and it's constantly a struggle. Like, they live in an apartment, and how do you explain to 9-month-old baby that she cannot cry for an hour and 30 minutes? So I think it was more like going guided towards that.
Here's something that I've also done because of similar, I don't want to call them distractions, because babies aren't distractions, but situations. And this isn't ideal, but I went inside of the garage. I kind of found refuge there, and similar to what Elise said, she kind of put a blanket over whatever she had in the background, just so that it appeared as if she was in a setting that was professional. I've sat in the car, and I've positioned it so that it was a certain kind of way. I even conducted one time a training in a car because I had to. But here's what I did. I level set the expectations of the interviewer, and I shared full transparency. Look, I have a recent situation that's happened where I cannot be in the environment that is ideal or optimal for this interview. And clearly I want to present my best foot forward. So because of that, I've had to almost have a makeshift environment, which means that I now had to go into my car. And more than ever, especially in light of the pandemic, people are more understanding. They know that real estate space is at a premium in our houses right now. So if you can find any space where you have that refuge and comfort, kudos to you. But for those of us who may not necessarily have it, be transparent about your environment and do your best to make sure that environment is set for the interview. Cool beans.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we talked about our talent, or we talked about our technology, we talked about the time, and now let's talk about the talent. So this is the most important piece of everything that we talked about because it reflects you. So you are the talent. You are the individual that is there to show off your expertise. So here's a best practice that I love. I call it smearing. So if you've heard of smizing, which means what in the chat box? Looks like many of you have it. Smiling with your eyes. Smearing is smiling using the mirror. So I don't want to show my nails. I haven't had them done, but smiling with your mirror. So it is really important that you take a mirror and place that mirror in front of you during the interview process. Because here's what happens. Because we're so anxious to talk and we're preparing and our minds are just, focused in on this interview. So we're not mindful of how many times we're showing a facial expression that may not be favorable to the person on the other end. So I am also very conscious of smiling and, catching myself in between those sentences to make sure that I'm smiling so that I share with you my level of enthusiasm and excitement. The mirror exercise prepares you for just that. So if you have a mirror off to the side, maybe take a quick peek every now and again. It also helps to, fix your appearance really quickly, just in case something may be awry. So the mirror exercise helps you to smile at the very beginning, helps you to smile throughout the conversation, and it reinforces smiling at the end. We have a tendency, once it's all said and done, it's like, it's over with. And then you're drained from it. You have to keep that composure all the way going into the very end until they turn off the computer, in this case. I used to say this when I was interviewing. It's so weird that we're saying used to, but the times when we were interviewing in offices that we recall, those were situations where when I would interview or have people that came into the office, I would share with them, you are interviewing all the way into the point you're at home. From the time that you get out of that car to the time that you walk into the office, to the time that you get back into your car, to the time that you drive off of that company site, you are to be prepared to show your best person or put your best foot forward, your authentic self. Because what happens is you never know who's watching, one, and two, you never want to be in a situation where you've killed the interview, you've done such an outstanding job with the interview, and then you get into your car and someone who just so happens to be the president of the company, maybe next to you or somewhere nearby, and you're like, I can't believe these stupid people, you know, and that reaction or that response to you, while it's genuine and it's how you feel, you never know who's listening or you never know who's in the background. Same applies for online or video interviewing. Have the same presence that you're bringing to the table, that bubbly smile at the very beginning throughout the entire part of your interview. Cool beans? Smile at the beginning, smile at the end. All right. Second point, be your authentic self. So what does that mean? Many of you that I know you personally, I know your personalities, I'm drawn to how you appear and appeal to me as you explain your career journey. Essentially, that's what you're bringing to the table. You're not bringing a representative of yourself. You're bringing your authentic self because that's what's going to appeal to the company. They want to know that you are confident, that you are yourself, that you are looking in the eye of the webcam, that you're paying attention to your body gestures and your movements. I have a habit of using my hands a lot. So try to kind of position yourself, not so that you are a robot or anything, but be mindful of the way that you're moving in the camera because sometimes that can also be distracting. So be your authentic self. So I'll pose to the chat box, what does it mean to you to be your authentic self? What does that look like? How are you showing up as your authentic self? Looks like we have, what does that mean? For me, it means that I am smiling. It means that I am sharing a lot about my background and my history. It means that I am confident, that I'm mindful of my posture. It means that I have kept my hands down because again, I do a lot of hand movements. So that's what it means to me to show my authentic self. Ooh. So going back, let's see, what do we have in the chat box? We have being bubbly. Try not to be something that you're not 100%. That is a misnomer. We go into these situations and we come across as if we're somebody completely different than what it is that we should be. So be yourself, your authentic self. And then finally, due diligence. Prepare, 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 prepare. So the same way that you would do a face-to-face interview is the same thing that you would do here. Finish strong. And what I mean by that is ask next steps. So the same way you would do in an in-person interview, what are the next steps? Can you tell me a little bit about what should I expect in terms of next steps? And that question is probably even more vital now with the online video interviews than it was before, because the way that the interview process that we're accustomed to has completely changed. So because now things have changed, the way that they are interviewing may have also changed. So ask, what are the next steps? What should I expect in the interview process? It's okay. They're not going to be offended by you asking. And quite frankly, as an interviewer, it is your right to know what is that process. And then a lot of times the person that's interviewing you, sometimes they forget to tell you. So this is your reminder, and it also makes you stand out and look good by coming in with that extra question. And here's our final. Send a thank you note/email. So you are to do this no matter what. So I get the question of, well, Dr. Airies, this is an online interview, so I don't think I may need to necessarily send a note or an email or thank you. You absolutely do. The same reason that you would send it for a face-to-face interview is the same reason that you would send it for a online or video interview. So here's my final question before we transition into just some housekeeping items and maybe answer some more questions. I often say this, and this is a trick for some of the students that I work with. So we talked about an online thank you note or email. What's another type of note that you would suggest that we send? And this is kind of like a trick question, but outside of a virtual thank you note, what other type of note can you send? In what other format or matter? This is a tricky question, so let's see. A phone call, handwritten, Michael, yay! A handwritten note. That is probably one of the key tricks when it comes to landing the job at the end or kind of putting that soft close on your interview process is a handwritten note that shows that you are taking an extra step to share your level of enthusiasm or excitement about that position. So a handwritten note, a phone call, an email, all of those are exceptional ways to stand out. Awesome. So we will go ahead and transition into just a few more items about Handshake and answer any questions from anyone about online interviewing, or if you have an online interview forthcoming, if you have specific questions about what to expect. Clearly, we're all here for you. I mentioned earlier that we have a couple of more sessions left for our career development series, but if you have access to and have interest in LinkedIn, it's important that you do go on and update your profile, your job board access in terms of job searching. But Handshake is your go-to one-stop shop. It's your chance to actually set up appointments with any of the executives in residence, Romero, Elise, Lisa, Mike, and myself. This is your chance to set up interviews. So we have Handshake clearly as the go-to tool. We also have a couple of handouts that I'll share out after this session, and I'll send those so that you can take a peek at some tips and tools and best practices. We even have a one-pager, by the way, on online interviewing. So take a peek at that. And then I mentioned earlier, our executives in residence. We're all still taking appointments, by the way, guys. So while we're still virtual, we're still taking appointments. So many of us have opened up our calendar so that we're not just taking them on the days that we have typically scheduled, but you can also make appointments outside of those times. So if you have any interest in making appointments, definitely reach out to any of the executives in residence. And here's a quick peek at all of us for those who don't know who is a part of the team. And then there's a quick tutorial or tool to help you to access the scheduling of appointments for any of the executives in residence. So I'll actually just pause there and answer any questions. So one question was about executives in residence over the summer. Yes, you will actually have access. And Jamie, you can better explain how many or that process. So I'll defer that question to you about who and where and when.
Yeah, absolutely. So we still have coverage over the summer. You guys don't come into the office as much as you do during the regular academic year. So we have limited coverage over the summer, but you can still meet with somebody. So still go on Handshake. and look to schedule an appointment. We had another question about executives and residents for our alumni. And you can, now this was from another presentation, but I want to make sure to mention this. So after you graduate, yes, we still want to see you. So you can certainly access the executives and residents even after you graduate. So just something else to keep in mind. So we try to stay around for you guys as much as possible. Like I said, I'm reading Michael's question right now. For graduating senior, for you help polishing. Yes, you still have access to them. You would still schedule through Handshake, Michael. So you're good to, similar to how you access the executives and residents as a student, you can still access them the same way as an alum. So your Handshake account is still active once you're an alum. And if we have any alums on the line, if you're interested in setting up a Handshake account, I'd be more than happy to help you do that. I'm sharing my email address right now in the chat. So just shoot me an email and I'll give you access to Handshake. Absolutely. And then it looks like Shannon has a question. How can someone be taken serious with limited experience? I'm going to defer back to Airies.
Sure, Shannon, that's a really, really good question. And I get that question, and I'm pretty sure the rest of the executives and residents get the same for a lot of our entry-level students and adult learners who have just entered into academia, and now they're interested in maybe getting or securing an internship or something similar. You are taken serious by the experiences that you've held in either your academic background in terms of the courses that you've taken. You're also taken serious by any of the extracurricular activities, associations or groups that you've belonged to. At the point where you don't necessarily have the work experience, you are leaning more towards your academic experience. And so you're drawing from again, the courses that you've taken, any volunteer experiences, and any professional or student group associations that you belong to. You're creating what's called a functional resume versus a chronological. Chronological means that you're just putting in order. I started here, I worked this company, and you're just kind of going down the list. For the purposes of many students that are trying to kind of build that bank of history without necessarily the work experience, that functional resume, which kind of gives more of a summary of your background and your experiences, which sometimes again may not be work experiences, that gives the person on the other end a holistic view of who you are and what you've done and what you represent. And that in turn makes the person, I would say, take you more serious. If you're talking about that type of presence, or Shannon, are you referring to a different type of presence? Are you talking about your face-to-face experience? Give me a little bit more of an explanation if that did not answer your question.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I'm just asking this question because I recently graduated with my MBA, and I have limited work experience. So I do have a few internships, but when I apply for, or, have applied and then still applying for positions, I either get that I can't participate in an internship program or just a full-time position because I'm overqualified, that I have my MBA, or that, I'm underqualified because I do have my MBA, which is great, but I don't have the work experience to go along with it. And that frustrates me so much. So how can I be taken seriously on paper, virtually on LinkedIn, Handshake? Because I can do in-person work. I don't have a problem with that, but it's just getting my foot in the door and having the interviewer or, an HR professional tell me, we want you, or I want to talk to you. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
I'm in that rough spot.
So it's your digital footprint, essentially. It's how you're presenting yourself online, and it's also how you're presenting yourself in terms of your resume and the credentials that you're putting forward. One, I would highly encourage that you spend some time with one of us, Shannon, one of the executives and residents, because we can spend more one-on-one time with you, kind of drafting out what that looks like. The second thing that I would offer up as a bit of advice, and Elise and Jamie definitely feel free to jump in here, but the second point of advice is that you are almost customizing your resume to reflect some of the skills that particular position is asking for. So for example, if you're looking for a marketing position and say you have now your MBA, you've taken some marketing classes, 1, 2, maybe in one of those positions that you've held before, you've had a little bit of marketing, but you probably didn't highlight it as much because for whatever reason, you didn't feel as if it was something that you should have. That's the time that you are really going to make a customized resume and customized solution for the type of role that you're applying. A tip that I always say to all of my students is take a peek at the job description. And if you feel as if there are skills and criteria that are aligned with some of your level of expertise, take some of that experience and modify it onto your resume only if it applies, so that the interviewer or the company can see that, yes, it may not be exactly aligned, but yes, I've had something very similar to what it is that you're asking for. So a lot of that massaging is what I call it, of your resume, your digital footprint, some of these tangible and intangible items that you're putting forward so that the person can assess your skills. You oftentimes have to recreate or revise depending on the opportunity. As an MBA, speaking personally as well, that is almost like a holistic degree. It kind of covers a lot of spectrums, right? So it's hard to know what to put forward or what individuals should identify as being the best criteria for the job. But by customizing your solutions that you're putting forward, and again, your digital footprint, that helps to best adhere to whatever it is that company is asking for. So spend some time with one of us one-on-one, and we'll definitely be able to support you with those frustrations. Jamie or Elise?
Yeah, sometimes I think when you're talking about building experience, and Shannon, I know you've done this and you've been successful in doing this in the past. So true story, I always talk about your work with Parker Dewey, right? So thinking about building experience through the gig economy and freelance opportunities. So when you do things like that, you're able to put those projects on your resume. And in that way, you're actually building more experience alongside your education. And then the other thing I want to make sure to mention is professional organizations. So the more involved you can get in professional organizations that directly tie to your whatever industry you're trying to get into. So if that's HR, well, make sure that you're looking at SHRM. Or if that's, I don't know, marketing, make sure that you're looking at Ad Week in Chicago or the Chicago Marketing Association. Those are all ways of getting the I would argue, kind of the buzzwords, and then getting exposure to people in your network and different events that might be able to help you. And so I've had some people that have said, well, the professional organizations, you know, they cost $150 to join. Now I'm not a student, so I can't pay the student fee of $20 to get in. And that might be true. But a little workaround, which sometimes works, is literally asking if they want any volunteers for a conference or something like that. So I've actually myself, there's conferences I've wanted to go to that I haven't had $1,500 to spend on attending. So I reached out and asked if they needed help with registration. Well, then I got to go volunteer 3 hours at the registration desk. And then the rest of the 5 hours for the conference day, I was sitting in for free on these sessions that people had paid a lot of money to be able to hear. So I think just kind of trying to come up with creative ways to get some exposure, experience, and then also increasing the network, that to me is key. And Elise, I'm sure you're going to jump in.
Yeah,
Elise, not to interrupt you, but I know, Jamie, we're up against the 1 o'clock time frame. So Elise, really quickly. And
Shannon, you know what? Why don't you just reach out to me and I can help you, and I won't take up any more time. How about that?
Awesome. So Jamie, I'll echo your sentiments and say that's how I landed my job at Monster, by the way, volunteering. And then just know any key takeaways that you would like from this session, just share out on the chat box. We'll go ahead and conclude the session. But Jamie, I know you typically have just parting remarks. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who joined the session. We'll have this recording forthcoming, and I'll also share out a few handouts and some tips and tools that I think are important that came directly from our lovely Handshake system. So thank you, everyone. And Jamie, any parting remarks?
I know, just let me thank Airies and make sure you join us for our next session. So thanks, Airies.